Hola, bona tarda. Benvinguts i benvingudes en aquesta jornada.
Good afternoon and welcome to this conference. It's a pleasure for us to see the great interest in the topic of this meeting because it is very dear to Fundesplai. And we have had more than 250 people registered. And so we have this conference in a series of conferences that have to do with the climate action to the Table European Initiative with support from the German Ministry of Economic Affairs. This project is carried out by Catalonia and two more organizations from Moderator from Slovakia and 50-50 from Greece. We want for students to get to know how important sustainable food is, and we want them to take on more sustainable and healthy eating habits. Let me finish this brief introduction with a couple of issues. We are going to have speakers speak in English and Catalan, and for that reason, we have available simultaneous interpretation. You have to click at the top, at the bottom of your screen on the globe, and then choose the language you want to follow the presentations in. One important thing for the project is for participants to do an assessment about and to share their opinion about the conferences. And for that reason, there is a link to a questionnaire about the conference. It is true that when one, at the end of a conference, well, people might not feel like filling out a questionnaire, but you will have the link available. And so please fill it out. Good afternoon. We are so happy to welcome you to this conference on sustainable school food. We want to look into global trends and also into local responses. For us at Fundesplai, sustainable food is very, very important. It's a pillar that we want to expand in our work, and considering the health of the planet and the health of human beings as a single thing. And for this reason, food is the most representative pillar of this union. We at Fundesplai work at more than 300 schools in school canteens. We don't use this term. We don't speak about canteens. We consider school canteens as a global, comprehensive education space. And so we call it the comprehensive noon educational space. There we work on sustainable and healthy eating habits through participation, empowerment, and autonomy of children. For us, this time is and this space is very, very important. And for this reason, we have to do our best to improve the individual choices of students in order to contribute to changing the current unfair system. We need to change these current trends. And for this, so we are present at 300 schools, and we deliver 30,000 meals a day. And so this year we have drafted a comprehensive proposal that looks to change the world through food. This proposal is available online. It's for free, it's available for all educators, and it is a toolkit for children, youngsters and their families to help them understand the link between nature and individuals and how through food we can help improve our health and the health of the planet. And following on this educational program, we have organized a large exhibition with more than 1,500 square meters that focuses on sustainable school food. The title is Eat, Act, Have an Impact, and it is available at San Cosme in El Prat del Llobregat. And you are all welcome to pay a visit to this exhibition. Alongside this, our proposal, we want to try and transform the canteens following sustainability and health. And so we have reduced by 45% CO2 emissions of each meal. That is very important. And we have also increased the use of seasonal produce, and we have cut animal proteins from school meals. Today, it is a very important day for us. We want to explore current global trends, and so we are going to have a number of guests, Donald Bundy from England, Geraldine Gilbert from the United States, and Cecilia Rocha from Canada, but she will be speaking about Brazil. So we have plenty of different, very interesting initiatives from across the globe. Without further ado, now we will give the floor to Mr. Bundy. He is a professor at the London School and has been working in the field for more than 30 years and is the author of Rethinking School Nutrition. As I was saying, he's a director at the ResearchConsortium of the School of Health and Nutrition at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. You have the floor.
Well, let me start by saying a big thank you to Carl's, Marina, Laura, and the team at Fundesplai for this opportunity to talk with you about the lessons learnt from the COVID pandemic and what that has changed in terms of the global movement towards school food. If I could have my slides, please. So I want to talk about the Research Consortium for School Health and Nutrition that has been established as a global activity, and which I hope that all of you who are participating in this workshop will want to join as we move forward. Let me start with the first slide, please, the next slide, and remind us that in January 2020, the surveys by the World Food Programme showed that some 388 million children, that's 1 in every 2 children in the world, were fed in schools. Nearly 400 meals fed every day. But what we know is that that was in January 2020. By April 2020, with the arrival of COVID, and if I could have the next slide, please, those schools closed. And by just 2-3 months later, we were seeing that 370 million children were no longer being fed. And many of you will be aware that it's been a slow process to rebuild these programs. And today, probably only 200 million are being reached. So about half the number that were reached at the beginning of 2020. the reaction to this effect was strong. And I want to just share with you 3 senior presentations from the Minister of Finland. Finland had a universal national school feeding program. From the President of France, from Emmanuel Macron, and from the President of Rwanda, President Kagame. And they're all saying the same message, that once they realized that the closing of the schools, that this brought home the message to everyone of the value of schools, not only as centers for education, but as centers within the community, as a way to reach school-age children and adolescents with meals, with health programs, as well as with education. And it became clear the necessity to rebuild these programs and to reestablish them. I have the next slide, please. And so in September last year, September 2021, the UN Food Systems Summit created a coalition of countries to rebuild school meals. And the coalition has 3 goals: to restore the programs to where they were in 2020 by 2023. So build back the existing programs. Secondly, the countries determined that there were about 73 million children globally who had not been reached in 2020 and who should have been reached, the most vulnerable children who were being missed out, to bring them now into the program. And thirdly, to raise the quality of school health and school nutrition programs overall by 2030. And these are the goals of the countries. And if I could have the next slide, please. These 66 countries who have signed the Declaration of Commitment to the School Meals Coalition. And I ask you to recognize that those countries include both rich countries and low-income countries. And if I take the next slide, it's to say that as a result of that, the UN agencies, and this is a letter from the heads of 5 of the UN agencies, from the World Health Organization, from UNESCO, from UNICEF, from the World Food Programme, and from the Food and Agricultural Organization. Those 5 main agencies concerned with school food asked for the creation of a research consortium for school health and nutrition. And that's the consortium that I represent here and which I'm inviting you to be part of. If I could have the next slide, please. And this is just to give you an example of the many partners who are already joined into this coalition, or in this coalition of work. If we have the next slide, please. In creating this research coalition, the decision was made to create a number of initiatives. I've just mentioned the Research Consortium as a key initiative, but other initiatives are the Financing Task Force, and this is an education task force led by the Global Education Commission, the peer-to-peer community of best practice led by Germany, and finally a data and monitoring initiative led by the World Food Programme. But to go now to the global initiative for the Global Research Consortium for School Health and Nutrition. This initiative is to support all the 67 countries that have signed up, and it's an initiative that's supported at the high level, including by the African Union. Have the next slide, please. It's an initiative of academics. So these are academic institutions. It's institutional partners like Fundesplai. It's working to be independent. So it's led by these academic groups, not by the UN. And obviously it's supporting the policy dialogue with governments. And that the goals of the consortium are, on the one hand, to develop evidence, to generate evidence, and especially to make the case for investment. And secondly, to provide policymakers of the coalition countries with the programmatic guidance on school health and nutrition. And to do this, in the next slide, we see this is the structure, that the top structure is the school meals coalition countries, the 67 countries that are involved. And then there are 4 communities of practice, communities, and these are the communities of practice that reach out across the world and bring together networks of people who are already working in these areas. So those who are looking at the impact of programs, those who are looking at the analysis of programs, those who are preparing examples of good practice, and those that are looking to develop new ways of measuring nutrition in school-aged children and adolescents. And if I could move to the next slide, and that the important point I want to make here is that the role for this coalition and the role for school food is, we accept, of course, the importance of the first 1,000 days of life, but we now say that the next 7,000 days, the time when children are educated, the time when children are developing to become young adults, so this is from 2 years of age through to 20 years of age, this is the time when these school-based programs can have a huge impact on the development of people, and that the development of human capital is depending upon that. And here's the example that I wanted to just share with you of the way some of the initial results that have been produced by the community of practice for analytics and metrics. This is a community looking at the value for money of school meals programs. And what they have shown so far is that the returns on investment are around $9 for every dollar invested. And that is because the investments come from many different the returns come from many different sectors. And I've just listed 4 sectors here that, of course, there's a return to nutrition, and that return to nutrition results in a return to education. And the return to education provides social protection. And of course, the programs also demand food from the agricultural supply system. So that all of those things come together. Right, the next slide, please. So that's I just wanted to give you a sense of where this global movement is going, and invite you, this is the contact information, invite you to be part of this effort, to join one of these communities of practice to develop a global movement around school food. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Moltes gràcies, Donald. Ara passaríem a...
Thank you very much, Donald. Now we will give the floor to Geraldine Gilbert. She is a consultant and a researcher for the Future. This is an international organization, non-profit organization, and they work on the different challenges regarding the future, especially with topics linked to the consumption of animal and vegetable protein. Geraldine, the floor is yours. You have your 10 minutes.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm actually in the UK, but I'm going to tell you about some work that we did in the United States. If I could have my slides up, please. Perfect. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our work on the future of protein. So Forum for the Future is an international non-profit. We're 25 years old, and we're all about accelerating progress towards a more sustainable, just and regenerative future. We work in various areas, not just food. A lot of it is climate change, but also different techniques for imagining the future that we want and then working out how to get it. A little bit about me. I've been at Forum for the Future for 15 years now, working on the future of food for most of that time. I do a lot of sustainability strategy development with food businesses and other organisations, and I also run collaborative projects. I'm also the founder and trustee of a sensory food education charity for school children and early years called Flavour School, all about exploring food with all of your senses. And I'm on the board of a social enterprise called Growing Communities in the East End, in north of London, which is a alternative system for getting. It includes a vegetable box scheme and farmers market and training programs and all sorts of things to do with getting sustainably grown, nutritious, delicious food to people in North London. So as you can see, passionate about food. So why does food matter? We've mentioned this already tonight, but you know, we have one home. We need it to produce food for everybody, and unfortunately, our global food systems are under enormous pressure right now. Agriculture is responsible for something like a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. So we can't fix climate change without changing how we farm. But climate change also presents enormous risks for continuing to grow food. And so we can't protect our food security without addressing climate change. So it's really important to unlock that challenge, not to mention that it's probably fair to say that most people in the world are not eating as well as they could be and suffer some form of malnutrition, whether that's obesity, hunger, or nutrient deficiencies. So a huge challenge, and that means huge opportunity also. So Forum for the Future has been working on the future of protein for a number of years now. Protein is very important to our diets, and the production of protein is also very impactful in environmental and social terms. It's a classic systemic issue. It's many interconnected challenges, many different stakeholders, difficult for any one stakeholder to solve, and cuts across environmental and social and other challenges. And so the Protein Challenge, our collaboration, started out by mapping the protein system, by trying to get beyond polarization between vegan diets versus carnivores, or plant proteins versus animal proteins, but to look at the whole system and understand for the different sources of protein in our diet, what the future pressures are on those proteins, where they interconnect, what the opportunities might be for progress, and the areas where collective and collaborative action might actually achieve the most impact. And by doing that mapping with a large group of interested stakeholders, we identified several areas for collaborative action. And one of those was this need to rebalance what forms of protein we're eating in, I suppose, richer people's diets. So those of us with relatively meat and dairy heavy diets. And to rebalance that towards less and better quality meat and much more plant-based protein and more veg generally. And one of the projects that came out of that, there were several. One of those was a set of pilots in the United States to look at how we can improve the supply and demand around good, tasty, nutritious, and appropriate plant-based meals in American schools. So this was a collaborative project funded by a group of interested businesses and foundations, and looked at that kind of systemic approach to tackling how do we influence diets and starting with kids in schools. So the aims were around improving what was available in terms of quality and quantity of plant-based protein options in school cafeterias, and to look at the demand side. So not just making sure the food was there, but making sure that the children would choose it from the menu and change their attitudes towards plant-based food. So as we heard earlier, school meals are really important. You know, this is feeding millions of students every year across the United States, across very different communities. And so we wanted to influence kind of future consumers, future citizens in their eating habits, and try and shift their perception of plant-based foods to be an acceptable main meal. And it was also about empowering students as influencers, not just as passive beneficiaries of some sort of program. So we worked with 10 very different school districts across the country, serving many millions of meals every year. And we also collaborated with food manufacturers. And the aim was to bring new types of products to market that would be healthy, nutritious and tasty and plant-based, and also to run some sort of engagement and behaviour change campaign around that. Unfortunately, not long after we'd kicked off, COVID hit and closed all the schools, as we heard, but we did already learn a lot of insights that have been very informative. So there were two tracks to the pilot, as I said. So one was to get the kind of demand side, so to ensure that better products were available, and we invited the food industry to innovate products for us. And the other was to address the demand side and ensure that the students would actually want to eat these meals and embrace them as an attractive option on the menu. And here's an example. So we created a student engagement toolkit based on some user-centered design, so working with the young people to generate the kinds of materials that would be engaging for them. And there's a whole toolkit that's freely available that includes workshop agendas, posters, messaging and different ways of engaging young people and presenting the options on the menu. And just to say, the schools we worked with had very different setups. So some of them were just reheating ready-made meals that were coming in. Some of them had their own kitchens and cookery and cooks and could cook meals from scratch. So we needed ingredients and food products that would work across a wide range of scenarios. So what did we learn? Many things. Firstly, that the product development has to be adaptable and responsive to the need. So this was very much about catering to different types of school setting, from, like I said, you know, just reheating meals and putting them out, through to being able to cook everything from scratch themselves. And we didn't see on the US school food market, you know, there just weren't the options available, and so we wanted to drive the innovation to get better products onto the market. But it's not just about having the foods available on the market. There has to be an enabling environment. You can't just put them on the menu. You need a number of other actions to make sure they get chosen. And behaviour change efforts really have to be targeted, and they have to take inequality into account. Across the 10 school districts that we were working with, there was a wide range of income levels, cultures and backgrounds for these different children, and it's really important to, I guess, know your audience and include your ultimate eaters, your beneficiaries, into the product innovation, not just assume that you know what they want. Change requires radical new collaborations. This was about bringing together the schools, the children, the food industry, but also local communities, parents, teachers, and more. And that's partly because behaviour change is not just about the individual child in the cafeteria, it's about the whole community, the teachers, the parents, everyone around them. It's really important to be innovating affordable foods, whether that's affordable to the school, often on very tight budgets, but also affordable to the children and their families. One of the aims of this was to create to create a generation of consumers who would also want to eat these meals outside of the school setting. So any products need to be ultimately affordable to families also. And that needs to be seen as a welcome challenge rather than a disincentive to get involved. And long-lasting change really needs a shift in the narrative, in the way that we frame and talk about food, and also subsidized food provision. So, for example, schools, but also elsewhere. And rethinking how we communicate the value and of these foods to influence their perception. So what everyone else can do based on these insights and more, we obviously need to keep moving on this, keep accelerating the change. We're not finished. Collaboration to shift diets. So, it's really important to engage a wide range of perspectives in any efforts to shift children's diets. And this needs new approaches. So that might be things like seller and customer. So food supplier, catering companies, and schools working together in new ways to come up with food products that work in each school, and also showing that collective demand for change. So if schools and food industry and communities are all asking for the same thing, it proves that the opportunity is there. We really need those new stories to frame our choices and habits as eaters, as consumers. So anyone engaging in any marketing or communications around food, whether that's how the meals are described on the school menu to children or their parents, or how caterers are describing the food to the schools that are going to buy it. We need to think hard about that, make it positive, appealing, and so on. And it needs investment in innovation that really meets that wide range of needs, not assuming that there is an average school customer or an average child consumer. And to really exploit all the opportunities around plant-based options. They need to be nutritious, but they also need to be tasty and appealing to children, for example. And really important to remember, this is an opportunity and the need to empower young people as influential agents of change. It was great that we were able to involve young people in designing our engagement materials, the posters, the stories to tell around the meals, because ultimately they are the ones talking to their friends, talking to their parents when they go shopping, and creating that future food culture. And experimentation is key. This is difficult. A lot of it is new ways of working, new ways of talking about foods, new approaches. And so, we need to be aware that we're experimenting and find ways to try things and then share what we've learned with others so that we can all progress together. So that was our US school food pilots. And I just wanted to share a couple of the other projects as part of the Protein Challenge, which are very connected. So that program ran in the United States. Meanwhile, over in Europe, we were looking at a slightly different side of the story around how to ensure that if we want tasty, nutritious, appealing, plant-based or plant-first meals to be available in restaurants, in canteens, in schools, hospitals, the workplace, etc., then chefs need to know how to create them and make them. And it's fair to say that in mainstream culinary training, those skills aren't at the heart of what future chefs are learning. And so we also looked at how to mainstream the skills needed to design, prepare, and cook really great, nutritious, tasty plant-based meals. And we piloted a set of lessons in a food management course at the University of West London. They have gone on to redesign their entire course towards future food, sustainable food. And we also shared, this is publicly available, so a set of modules for culinary trainers to use in their lessons that can be easily built into what they already teach, and a number of insights for how to get going and how to change the mainstream training and education for food professionals so that they know how to design the meals that we want. final example, we also ran a kind of rapid innovation collaboration called an action sprint, and with a number of partners, including food businesses, community groups, and so on, around the future of plant-based innovation. So there's a lot of money and energy around plant-based burgers, meat substitutes, fish substitutes, but a lot of it isn't necessarily healthy or nutritious, and it's not necessarily targeted at everyone. And so we wanted to look at how could we capture all this energy and momentum, but channel it towards what we really need, which is good quality, affordable, tasty and nutritious plant-based foods for everyone without leaving anyone behind. And so we came up with some insights there on what innovation, plant-based innovation done well, might look like in terms of really ticking all of those boxes. And just to sum up, really, yeah, there's so much excitement around plant-based food, vegan food, meat alternatives, you know, the incredible burgers, all of that stuff. And unfortunately, yeah, it's not really delivering at the foundational shift that we need. And I think it's really important that we not forget the different things that we need to deliver, and that includes health and nutrition as well as environmental sustainability. And we can't, if we separate the two, then that's a missed opportunity. And at Forum, we use the concept of sustainable nutrition to remind ourselves and to frame what we think needs to happen. I think it's really useful so that we don't miss unintended consequences of good intentions. We really need to think about how the efforts that we make, the innovations that we're trying to create, are joining these two up rather than forgetting one. So we need both sustainable food production and healthy consumption at the other end. So sustainable nutrition is a really helpful kind of shortcut to the many complexities, but reminding ourselves that we need both of those things and not to forget one when focusing on the other. Because ultimately, you know, I said it at the beginning, but if we don't figure out the future of food, we can't possibly deliver on the rest of the Sustainable Development Goals. Food, agriculture and diets underpin all of these, really. And if we're going to thrive, then we need to make sure that that's everybody. And you know, what an amazing opportunity to create healthy, nutritious, sustainable and tasty food for everybody. That's it from me. Thank you.
Moltes gràcies a tu, Geraldine.
Thank you very much, Geraldine. I think we share many of the goals you've just explained, and we are working towards the same direction as you do. We will now give the floor to Cecilia Rocha. She will share her research on school food in Brazil. She's a professor and the ex-director of the School for Nutrition in Canada. And she was a director of the project Strengthening the Food Security in Brazil from 2004 to 2010. Good afternoon, Cecilia.
Hello, everyone. I hope everybody can hear me. And I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to present on the case of Brazil. If I can have my slides, please, so that we can start on this. So thank you very much. This is a very interesting meeting and an important topic, important issue to discuss. I want to start by saying that just yesterday, we had a change in the name of my university. So it's not Ryerson University anymore. Now we are called the Toronto Metropolitan University. Of course, I didn't have the time to send that information to the organizers. I had already sent my slides, but just so you know, and from now on, if you hear about the Toronto Metropolitan University, it is the formerly known Ryerson University. And I also want to tell you that I work at the Center for Studies in Food Security at my university. And in that university, in that center, we have a project which is called the Betinho Project, which is a project that that shares information and research among Canadian and Brazilian researchers, and this is part of it. So thank you very much for inviting me to talk about the school meals program in Brazil. And it was a challenge for me to say that I needed to present this to you in 10 minutes. So I tried to prepare the slides, very short slides that would convey the key points. So the first thing is I tried to answer those questions right away. The questions there were posed to me by the organizers, which was first, how to minimize the environmental impacts of school food. And I would say that the short answer to that, in the case of the Brazilian program, is to focus on local food. I think that's the short answer, to focus on giving school meals the local flavor. And the second question, how can they contribute towards a more sustainable and just food system? The short answer for me is to recognize the importance of food as a public good. I think that the sustainability and justice of food comes from its nature as a public good. And as a public good, the sustainability of it, the justice of it, must be institutionalized. And by that, I mean, we all responsible, everybody in society is responsible for that, but the institutionalization must come from policy and a central role for governments, either local or national governments. So those are the short answers, and I can expand on that later, but so I'll just give you some key points about the National School Food Program in Brazil. It's a very old program. It was created in 1955. So I grew up with this food program, but it has changed. It has changed quite a lot since when I was in school. And I think it's changed for better. And it was extensively reformulated in 2009. It is a universal program. It provides over 42 million, serving 42 million students in public schools. All public schools in Brazil must have the National School Program in place. There is a federal funding that is set by the federal government, and this is in partnership with municipal and state governments. So they share on the cost and on the implementation of the program. Some of the funding is differentiated. Some of the schools or areas that need more funding are provided, particularly for indigenous and Afro-descendant schools. You provide more money for the meals, for the food that those schools will be serving. An important component of this change that we had in 2009, in the 2009 legislation, a national legislation, was that it requires that at least 30% of the federal funds must be spent on purchases from family farms. If you think about that, this is a national program, it's 42 million students being served. This is not only an important component of bringing in the local focus, local food as an important element, but also in supporting this local production of food, because at least 30%, and supporting the small family farmers as well. So this was a very important change in the legislation. I I have this link for a YouTube short video on the program. If you'd like to watch that, it is translated into English. It's a very interesting video. It's a government video on the program, if you'd like to look at this. In 2020, there was further change in the legislation to be consistent with the Brazilian Food Guide. And the Brazilian Food Guide that came out in 2014 was a change, a complete change in the nutrition food guide of the country in focusing on food, and in particularly focusing on the importance of minimally processed or in natura foods. So the Brazilian Food Guide was an important component in making sure that the nutrition of the Brazilian population, the health of the Brazilian population came from foods that were not ultra processed. And the legislation then for the school meals program was that there was a limit on the maximum of the expenditures, so 20% only, that could go to processed and ultra-processed foods. And so, and 75% to be spent on minimally processing and in natura foods, which again provides that incentive for the local foods to be available in schools. I mentioned the institutionalization of this program, and this is a little bit of a schematic representation of that. And what we have here is that we have the right of food as part of the Brazilian legislation, the Brazilian Constitution. So the Brazilian Constitution included the right of food in 2010. And the orange rectangles that you have in this scheme represents the participation of civil society into the formulation of programs and the governing of the food legislation up to the municipal level. So we do have participation of civil society and participation of civil society with local governments in implementing that program at the local level, at the municipal level, including the participation of civil society in monitoring the implementation of that program at the municipal levels. So that's what I meant by the institutionalization. You have legislation and you have a whole set of governance schemes into the implementation of those programs. So I don't want to be too long because we're already late, and I would like to leave it for discussions or questions. I just want to give you some photos of what it looks like, the programs in Brazil. So all schools in Brazil must have a kitchen, and they must prepare the food in local. So this is they all must have people to prepare the food. One of the things about empowering the students is that some schools have self-serve cafeterias where the students learn not to waste food. The meals are mostly rice, beans, vegetables, rice and bean vegetables, and some meat. And that's very much representative of the Brazilian typical foods. Yes, and it is available through all the schools and even kindergarten schools. This is a photo from 2015 in the city of Belo Horizonte. And I will leave it at that. So if we have any questions, or now or later, you can get in touch with me. This is my email. and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Molt bé. Moltes gràcies a tots vosaltres.
Thank you very much to all three panelists for your very, very interesting presentations and for talking about your research in such a short time. We have received a number of questions that I am going to share now, and please be brief in your answers as well. There's a question for Donald, very direct and simple, and it asks how one can join the community of practice you mentioned earlier.
Super, yes, thank you for the question. If you, on the last slide, there are details of how to connect with the website in particular. If you look on the website, it gives you all the information to how to connect with us. And we're very happy to hear from you. Personally, I'm very happy to hear from you, but also there's a group of us who are involved in following up on these matters. So please feel free to connect with us. Yeah,
Ara veiem la imatge.
So yeah, we can see the details on screen. One question for Geraldine. Can you explain your position about plant-based meat, whether we support this or not from the nutritional point of view, from the sustainability point of view?
Is this about plant-based meat substitutes? Yeah, like plant burgers, fake meat. Yeah. Well, it's not difficult to give a quick answer. I think every product needs to be put in context. So as I said during my presentation, unfortunately, a lot of the excitement is about products which are very clever technologies, but not necessarily healthy or nutritious, or not necessarily more healthy and nutritious than what they're replacing, hamburgers, for example. So I do think that that's a failing, if you like. So if people switch from eating beef burgers to plant-based burgers, which have a low environmental impact, but are still bad for their health, then we've only made half of the journey. So we need to address that. I do know, I think some of the potential in those products is that if you're trying to quickly reduce impacts and with the minimal possible behavior change, then if you go to the US, for example, people eat an unbelievable number of beef burgers on a regular basis. So if you want a quick impact at scale, if you can replace those burgers with a plant-based burger, then that has a big impact. But of course, it doesn't, only on the environmental side and the animal welfare side, and it doesn't address the health and nutrition side. So it's not the whole picture. I think in an ideal world, and I suspect that everybody here is in this group, we would build food culture, positive food culture, while also building a food market around ourselves, an environment of healthy, sustainable foods that are tasty, considered tasty and appealing to everybody. So I think a lot of the kind of mass market solutions miss the importance of food culture, and just fail to take that really systemic view to the products they're innovating, of making sure that what is considered a solution is both environmentally more sustainable and healthy and nutritious and tasty, because otherwise people won't eat it. So same goes when we're trying to create or offer foods that are healthy and nutritious and sustainable. They need to be tasty and appealing. And so perhaps that's one of the reasons that people don't eat as many healthy and sustainable foods as we would like, is that they might not be that appealing to the palate, to the audience. And that's why considering the audience is so important. So plant-based fake meat burgers may have a role to play in shifting some people and reducing meat consumption, but they're obviously not the whole solution.
Gràcies, em sembla que queda força clar.
So very clear answer. Thank you. One question for Cecilia. And so the question is, how was decided to establish a minimum of 30% of food coming from family farms, and in which way students are aware of the origin of the food they are eating? How do you work on that from an educational point of view?
Yeah, thank you. So the 30%, in that governance that I mentioned of the school meals program, at the national level, there used to be, we don't have it at the moment because of the national government that we have at the moment, but at the national level and at the municipal level, there was the formation of the Council for Food and Nutrition Security, councils, which is civil society and government together. So the 30% was what came up as a discussion at the council levels. And that's what they decided in 2009, that it would be possible for family farms to supply to the school meals program. And that's the technical evaluation that they had at the time. And since then, they have had slowly the municipalities following that and coming up with the 30% of the food coming from family farms. And that has been quite successful at the moment now. So that's it was at the moment, that's what they thought it would be possible, because there are a number of difficulties for small farmers, small family farmers to supply schools. So there was a need to adopt that. In terms of the children's education, there is a whole program associated with the school meals program of not only, there's a lot of training that is done throughout. And there is the training of the people that prepare the foods, for example, because they have people preparing foods in all public schools in Brazil. You have the training of the civil society members that will participate in monitoring the school meals program. So parents, the workers, farmers, everybody that's teachers that participate. And they have a school program, a nutrition and food program for the children to understand what they are eating. So in some schools, as I mentioned in the photo, they have self-serving. The children learn about not only what they eat, but also to not waste food. So they have composting, and they have a number of other educational components that are added into the program. So that's how they have it there.
Moltes gràcies, Cecilia.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Unfortunately, we know that there are more questions, but unfortunately, we have to continue with the second part of this event. So once again, thank you very much for your contributions, and thank you very much for this international global look on the topic. Thank you for sharing your experiences, the initiatives that are taking place all around the world, and that have a common goal, which is improving the health of the people and the planet. Thank you very much. Now we will hand the floor over to Susagna, who is an educator at Fundesplai, and she will present the next panel, which is a local panel, which also will try to tackle this global issue. Thank you very much, Carlos. We will continue with the second part of the event, and I'm sure it will be as fruitful and as interesting as the first part. This second roundtable has the title of Local Strategies for Global Challenges, and we will talk about the different strategies that there are in our territory to move towards more sustainable food systems. To talk about all these things, we have today Gemma Salvador with us and Lidón Martrat Sanfeliu. Thank you very much, both of you, for being here. And I'm going to introduce them. Gemma Salvador Castells is a nutritionist. She's responsible for food programs and for the promotion of health in the Public Agency for Health in Catalonia. She's coordinating some programs of school food. She has created different different restaurants of Mediterranean healthy food, and she works also in many other projects. She is also a founder of the NGO Nutrition Without Borders. And then I would like to present Lidón Martrat Sanfeliu. She is a politics expert. She has been working in international cooperation since the 2000 years 2000. She has been in charge of coordinating the project Barcelona World Capital of Sustainable Food 2021, and she works in the field of the food policies in the urban area of Barcelona. We will briefly now describe how we will have the second roundtable. We have a specific question for each one of the panelists, and we have then 3 common questions. I would like to remind you that you have 5 to 6 minutes to answer to these questions, and since we are quite tight on the schedule, it will be difficult to have some time for open questions from the audience. So Gemma, the first question goes for you. The transformation into healthier diets up to the year 2050 will involve major changes. We will have to increase the consumption of fruit and vegetables, and the consumption of foods such as red meat and sugar is going to have to reduce to on 50%. So what's the position of the Public Health Agency of Catalonia related to the reduction of the red meat consumption or the animal-based products in school meals? And what are the challenges that does this option entail? Thank you, Susana, for your question. Hello, Lidón. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this very interesting panel. It was really interesting and enriching to listen to the contributions of the previous panelists. It is quite a long question, and it will be difficult to answer it in only 5 or 6 minutes, but I will do my best. As you mentioned in the beginning, I am responsible for the program in charge of reviewing the school meals in Catalonia. We have been working over the past 15 years on that program, and we have reviewed more than 6,000 meals during this period of time. The perspective or the global perspective that I have from the work that we have done, I can see that the meals and the menus have improved significantly in terms of the presence of fresh products, not only with fruit for desserts, but also in other dishes of the menu. But we also identified that we had a major challenge ahead of us. We wanted to tackle these advertisements that the scientists are expressing, not only from the point of view of improving the health, but also from the point of view of environmental sustainability. All these recommendations lead to a common point, a common place, both with the nutritional and environmental approach. We can see now that we the consumption of animal-based products is too high and the consumption of fresh plant-based products is too low. There is also a high level of consumption of products that are highly processed products, which is around 30% of the food that children eat in many countries. Our agency is very clear about this topic. It's not only a recommendation that affects school meals, but affects the whole population. And we all included these recommendations in a guideline. In the past years, these recommendations included in the guidelines are not part of any law or are not legally binding. They're part of a process of explaining and suggesting new menus that include less meat. In the past, we could see that there were animal-based products for the first dish and for the second dish. For example, pasta with some sauce with mincemeat, and then as a second dish, chicken, or maybe having some cannelloni filled with meat for the first dish and for the main course, and then for the second course, an omelette. And this is the challenge that we have right now. We want to reduce the presence of animal-based protein in the menus. And this is all included in the guideline that I was referring to earlier. The recommendations that we do for school food or for school menus is to include fish once a week and once a week egg, or twice a week meat, twice white meat, or once a white meat and once a red meat, and once at least some beans for the main course, and once or twice a week beans for the second course. So we are pushing year after year a little bit further. We're pushing the companies that work in the school environment, in the food school environment, to move to a plant-based protein. And I say that we are pushing them, and maybe Lidón will agree with me later, that one of the problems that we can see is that most of the professionals working in the field of food and school food do not have the necessary resources, do not have the training or the skills or the working culture of working with a high amount of plant-based products and less animal-based products. To see the changes that have taken place in the Agency for Public Health in Catalonia, and which is also recommendations that are followed by the public agency of the City Council of Barcelona, because we work hand by hand. The recommendations that are included in the current guidelines have to do with the real environmental impact of these recommendations. From 2012 to 2020, we could see a reduction of 55% of the CO2 emissions, 40.8% of liters of water, and 48.3% of soil or square meters of soil. And this is some calculations that have been made with a public calculator, which was made public by the energy of waste management in Catalonia. These calculations have been made only based on the offer of protein that were included in the menus from 2012, and the offer and the quality and the origin of the protein products included in the menus of the year 2020. This is what it is on the paper, and now let me go back to the more specific problems or challenges. It is difficult and it will involve a whole process. We have to support all professionals with the specific training, as some of the some of the speakers were saying, I think it was Geraldine was saying that we need to change the narrative. We need to switch the narrative. We have to give the appropriate information to the families. It's not about reducing the budget in school food. It's about taking care of not only of the health of the consumers, but also of the health of our planet. A couple of years ago, we drafted a document under a request of the Education Department to include vegetarian and vegan menus in the school food. This document that is accessible online. It is a document which proves that it is something that can be done in school canteens, but it requires to have well-skilled and trained professionals. I think that maybe I went beyond the time that I had. Sorry about that. Don't worry. I understand it is a great challenge.
Has aportat unes dades molt interessants.
So thank you very much for sharing these very interesting figures. And congratulations, because we are on a good track. Now on to Lidón, eating seasonal and local produce, as the previous panelist said, is one of the pillars to transform our food model. And so my question is about the alternatives and strategies that you are pushing for in order for students to eat local produce. Thank you so much to Fundesplai for inviting us. Hi, Gemma, so nice to see you again. So this is a complex question. We at the Barcelona Council have been working on food policy for a few years. Last year, we had the global year in our city. And let me refer to a number of factors. One, to promote local seasonal produce and more sustainable and healthy meals. As has already been mentioned, we need to focus on the supply, on the demand, and look at all channels. And we have to look at production. We are promoting projects to have short marketing channels or in order to work with farmers. And we want to make things easier for them in an economically sustainable way for catering companies. And it is also important to work with other administrations that work not only locally but also regionally. We work with the Catalonian government on this issue. At the same time, we are working at the City Council on another project that has to do with sustainable social meals. And so there we work in order to push for a cultural shift. As Geraldine was mentioning, it is important to change the narrative. It's important to work with the students, but also to train families, to educate families, and to create an environment for everybody to accept this kind of products that have to be attractive, and we have to create the right environment for the end users. And one of the very important things is to provide training and accompany and provide the management knowledge for catering companies, for those working in the kitchen or working with students. We have to help them, train them to work on the narrative of the need to change food. Also, kitchen workers are very, very important. They need to learn how to make their menus, their meals more attractive using vegetable-based or plant-based courses, meals. They want to learn how to make plant-based proteins more attractive. And it is also important to support innovation. And for that, we need to establish partnerships with people from catering, with chefs, with organizations that work in the field. And in our program, we are working and accompanying the different actors. And it is also important to work with families, as I was saying earlier. And for catering companies, they need training about sourcing their kitchens, because when you switch from a kitchen that usually just boil frozen produce, or in order to start working in a different way, so things are very difficult. It's difficult to know whether the produce you're receiving is local or not. And we need to review the kitchens, because to work with fresh produce, you need more room. For frozen meals, you just need a large refrigerator. But the organization of kitchens need to change as well. And one other important thing where we are working at that has to do with urban food policies in Barcelona has to do with public procurement. It is not something that is managed by the city council only, but also by the state and also by the Catalan government. And there is a law about school canteens, pretty old. Now it's been discussed and debated. We want to renew this law, and it doesn't refer much to the food kids get at their school canteens. But in the past years, a very important innovation has been made, but we only have recommendations. We need binding rules, binding standards. And that is what we are trying to achieve. We want to establish compulsory and binding standards for schools to use 75% of seasonal and fresh produce. And by doing that, you are supporting local production, because if you have to use fresh produce, you are prioritizing local producers. But institutionally and legally, it's not so easy. We are doing our best in order to change the instruction for public procurement at the Barcelona City Council. We expect to pass this new regulation in the fall. We want to establish a minimum of local procurement, a minimum percentage of organic products, and also a minimum of seasonal and fresh products. That is going to be compulsory for public procurement by the Barcelona City Council. We are referring to kindergartens and to procurement from nurseries, schools. And we would also like to have a law for the whole of Catalonian canteens. And I think it is very important to make this all compulsory by law. Everywhere where there is public procurement for when institutions are buying food for schools, for hospitals, etc. So we have to set examples, give example when we give recommendations, because otherwise it's pretty contradictory to see that there's people recommending everything how things should be, but then we cannot implement that in our area. It is true that recommendations have been helpful for many years, but now it's the time, after so many years and such a long way, it's about time we receive legal support so as to make it compulsory and to close the circle. And the current governments at the city council, at the Catalonian government, and I would also say in Spain, in the Spanish government, are more supportive. Yes, absolutely. It is a hard process. It's a difficult process. There's a lot of discussion. But the most important thing is to have the will to go all the way and for all actors to push in the same direction. And one of the things that I haven't mentioned has to do with the price of school meals. In Catalonia, it's publicly established, 3.33 euros per meal. And we have to make sure that companies invest that money. Because when private companies get the contracts, very much part of the money goes to canteen instructors, and not always that money not always goes to food. And so we need to work on the partnership, and we also need shared crops, and we need to work hand in hand with local farmers. There's a network here in Catalonia gathering companies that manage school canteens and producers, and there is a distribution central. They meet every year to plan the crops for the coming school year. And so they plan the meals depending on the crops and the other way around. And so farmers start planting what they will be providing schools in the coming year. And that is something that could be scaled up. Thank you so much, Lidón. You are sharing so much information, so many scoops. We also know about this joint planning. That's so interesting. And you have mentioned about the importance of education, of providing training to producers, to local producers, in order to establish networks. But as you were saying, this is a whole process, and what is very important is to walk on the same direction. Now we are going to move on to the last two questions. I'm going to read them all at once, and then you can answer. So my question is about the contribution that the school canteens do for the transformation of the food model. So the question is, what do you think school meals contribute to a more equitable, sustainable, and fair food system in Catalonia. In the first part of this meeting, much has been said about the importance of empowering children. And in your opinion, what role can kids play, or maybe they are already playing, in order to push for a transformation of our food system? Well, I think it was Cecilia or Geraldine who said that kids are the consumers of the future. They are the prescribers of the future, so they are a very important target. But students or kids, we have to work with their environment, with their families, with leisure settings, and the professionals that are present in the household. It would be the older brothers, sisters, parents, other relatives, instructors, school and canteen instructors, coaches, sports coaches. All these professionals are leaders for students and have a huge impact on their decisions, and especially so regarding food. And so it is very important to work on the environment of the students, because the sustainable and healthy, so as the decisions that they make are easy. So we have to facilitate or help them make healthy decisions. So we have to make those foods available. And it won't be easy to achieve that just by focusing on students. We need to make it easy from the administration, from schools, etc., for the environment of the kids to make these healthy decisions. And we also have to empower kids. We have to empower them when it comes to purchasing and preparing food, and for the entire community to participate in the system. I think Cecilia already mentioned, made reference to self-service system. That is one option. But the key here is that the kids can decide how much food they want to eat, how much food they want to put on their plate, so as to prevent food waste. And so it is important for students to be the actors in this process.
I think that Geraldine already mentioned the importance of using influencers to have an impact on children and young people, because media have changed. We cannot use the regular television channels or the radio or putting posters on the wall. No, we need to change the narrative. We need to use different means to reach children and youngsters. I think that what Mr. Mr. Donald Bundy said in the beginning, well, he referred also to this topic, the need to change the narrative, and they think this is something that came up in the contributions of the different panelists. If we expect to have different results, we cannot continue doing business as usual. You, as an association, Fundació Catalana Fundesplai, you have made a change. You have made a major change, and this is something you are trying to reflect in the exhibition that you are having currently now, and also that you are also reflecting on the project of the program food to change the world with the 35,000 meals that you're serving. There are other projects that are also very interesting. For example, serving the amounts of food that children can identify. Or, for example, the project to serve the plate as they do at home so that they learn the amount of food that they need to put on their plates. And I think that this learning process is something that also adults should bear in mind, because we are used to eat what we have on our plate because we have paid for this food, or because we wanted the plate to be empty when we finish. To finish, I'd like to say that it's better to have less food on the plate and then go for a second round rather than filling up your plate. And this is important to avoid food waste. Thank you very much. We will finish with this last insight. Put less food on your plate and go for a second round. This could be a slogan. Lidón, I don't know if you have anything to add to what Gemma just said. Well, I do not want to repeat the same things again, but I think that school canteens are really important to contribute to this change that we need. If we're able to supply local and healthy foods, it is an improvement for our productive system as well, because our productive system is also undergoing some hardships. We are training the future consumers, and I completely agree with what Gemma just said. They need to be empowered. They need to be key actors, and therefore we need to change narrative. We need to change the approach. Another thing that I would like to highlight is that this is something that is not only enshrined in the afternoon meal or in the noon meal. We have the privilege of acting in the school canteen, but we have to expand the narrative to other spaces. And this has to be part of the educational curriculum. It has to be part of the things covered in the classroom. And therefore, we need to involve teachers as well. We need to raise awareness. I think Cecilia mentioned that this is a public good. So institutions need to support this kind of narrative, and this is something that we have to make available and for citizens so that they can integrate it. And this will help to make the change smoother and to make the change more acceptable. Regarding the different messages that children receive, it is important to bear in mind that they should be regulated. For example, regarding adverts that they receive via traditional media, television and radio, or via the social media. There was a problem here in Spain related to the control of adverbs and commercials, and I think this is also something that it should be worked on. Thank you very much, Lidón. The topic that you've just mentioned, commercials and adverts, is something that we are working on. We would like to organize an event in the future because we think it is necessary to work on that as well. And it's also, of course, food for discussion. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we went beyond the schedule. We also started a little bit later. There were a few questions for you. And if it's okay with you, we will gather all the questions and we will forward them to you so that we are able to have the answers as well. I'm sorry for the panelists because for not having the chance to answer to them now. I stay with two main ideas. We need children to be key actors of this process. We need to change narrative by all means necessary. Thank you very much. Thank you especially for the panelists that were here for the first panel and also for the second panel. We will send a video in the coming days with the whole event. And thank you very much to all the attendees for your patience. And once again, sorry that we did not have time to answer the questions. I hope to see you very soon. Thank you.